Hey guys, tonight we're going to journey back in time to one of the darkest, most unforgiving periods in human history, the medieval ages. Picture yourself standing in a cold, muddy street, a constant chill in the air. The buildings are dark, cramped, and made of stone, and a faint, rancid smell of unwashed bodies and waste lingers in the air. The world around you is rough, and it's only a matter of time before the harsh reality sets in. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is, where you are. It's always fun to see how far this story travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you stand there, in the midst of it all, the first thing you realize is just how unprepared your modern self is. You've probably heard the phrase medieval used as shorthand for difficult, but you're about to understand why that word is an understatement. You think of knights in shining armor, grand castles and feasts, but what's really happening around you isn't nearly as glamorous. Sure, there are knights, those lucky few who live in relative comfort, but for most, life is a daily battle of survival. The physical challenges you'd face would break you down quickly. Imagine trudging through streets that are little more than ankle-deep muck, surrounded by the hum of disease-infested air. It's a fight against exhaustion, against the elements, and against a way of life that leaves no room for weakness. With no modern medicine or comfort, the weight of just being alive would be enough to wear you down. The reality of life in medieval times is that the odds are stacked so high against you you'd never even get a second chance. And that's just the beginning of what you'd have to endure. As you trudge through the damp streets, your clothes are already sticking to your skin, weighed down by the moisture that never seems to leave. It's not even a rainy day, just the constant oppressive humidity that hangs over the land like a thick blanket. You thought you were ready for this, but you're starting to realize that you're not. The cold is seeping into your bones and there's nowhere to escape it. There's no central heating here. The warmth you take for granted in the modern world simply doesn't exist. You pass by a blacksmith's forge, the heat from the fire flickering and making your skin tingle. But even that is fleeting. It's just a reminder of what you can't have: comfort. There are no soft, cozy blankets waiting for you at home. No warm, relaxing showers to wash away the grime of the day. Instead, you can't help but feel the sting of the raw wind cutting through your tattered clothing as you walk along the muddy path. You would give anything for a change of clothes, but that too is an impossible dream. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly suffered more than their city-dwelling counterparts in the cities, but there's no denying the physical toll it takes on everyone. You're constantly battling the cold, your body under constant stress as it tries to survive in this environment. The dirt doesn't come off, it clings to you like a permanent mark, and any chance of comfort is buried deep beneath layers of grime. As you press forward, you feel the weight of your own body more than ever. The physical toll of the harsh medieval lifestyle isn't just about enduring hard labor, it's the unrelenting exhaustion that comes from the sheer brutality of your environment. There are no easy days here. You could be working from sunup to sundown, hauling water from the well or breaking your back in the fields, and the only thing that awaits you at the end of it all is a small, crowded room filled with nothing but more exhaustion and frustration. And let's not forget the fact that the water you're drinking is probably contaminated. No one has a modern filtration system. You drink from the same wells used by animals, and sometimes it's hard to tell whether what you're holding is water or something far less savory. The disease it carries could be waiting to strike you down, and there's no cure, no antibiotics to save you. You wouldn't even know where it came from. It's all just part of life in the medieval world, a world that has little room for those who can't endure. The stench of the streets begins to sink deeper into your clothes, no matter how much you try to shield yourself from it. You can't escape the dirt, the refuse, and the putrid smell of unwashed bodies. Hygiene is a luxury in the medieval world, one that simply doesn't exist. You'd think you might be able to wash away the day's filth in a nearby stream or with a little bit of water, but think again. Even a simple act of cleaning yourself becomes a monumental task. Medieval people were, by today's standards, utterly obsessed with maintaining a very limited sense of cleanliness. Bathing? Not so much. It's often said that some regions went months, sometimes even years, without seeing a proper bath. Bathhouses existed, but they were few and far between, overcrowded, and often breeding grounds for disease. Even if you did manage to find one, you'd probably be stuck sharing a public tub with dozens of others, the water turning murky with each successive person. And while you might think that soap would be the answer, think again. Soap was a rare commodity. Even wealthy people didn't have the luxury of a daily scrub down. Historians still argue about the severity of the medieval hygiene problem, but the fact remains you're stuck in a world where cleanliness is a fantasy. You'd have to settle for wiping yourself down with vinegar-soaked rags and hoping for the best. And even if you were lucky enough to find a place to wash up, the water would likely be contaminated, bringing with it a host of new problems. The worst part, the diseases that accompany such filth are rampant. Lice, fleas, and other pests would be constantly crawling on you, irritating your skin and making sleep nearly impossible. You could try to keep them at bay, but they always find a way to return. It's almost like living in a constant state of discomfort, with no reprieve. You'd think a world as harsh as this would at least give you an opportunity to catch your breath, but that's not the case. The air around you is thick with disease. The Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, swept through Europe multiple times during the medieval era. The thing is, the medieval world had no understanding of how diseases spread. There were no antibiotics, no vaccines, and no understanding of germs. The plague, cholera, smallpox, and dysentery were all frequent visitors. People died in droves, often without warning. The worst part, there was no way of knowing if you'd be next. You could wake up feeling fine, but by the end of the day you could be dead. It was all part of the grim reality of medieval life. Disease didn't just wipe out the elderly or the weak, it struck down people of all ages, leaving entire families buried in mass graves. The constant fear of death was ever present, and it would break anyone who had the misfortune of living in this time. As you try to navigate the filth and disease, your stomach growls in protest, but there's little relief in sight. Food is scarce, and what little you do get is often far from appetizing. The medieval diet is a far cry from the variety you're used to today, and the quality of what you eat is worse than you can imagine. You might think you could just grab a quick snack, but even that's a gamble. Bread, if you're lucky, would be your staple food, usually stale, hard and tasteless. Meat for those in the lower classes is rare. A diet primarily of grains and vegetables fills your stomach, but doesn't do much for your energy or health. You'd be eating a lot of pottage, a mixture of vegetables and grain, often boiled until unrecognizable. If you're in the lower class, it's not just a meal, it's your life. You'd have to make do with whatever scraps you can find. Rotten vegetables, bits of leftover meat from wealthier households, and maybe the occasional wild rabbit or chicken. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly ate better or worse than some modern impoverished communities, but one thing is clear, you won't be feasting anytime soon. And the worst part, there's no guarantee that what you're eating is even safe. The food is often undercooked, unclean, or improperly stored, which means you're at constant risk of foodborne illness. Just imagine eating something that looks like a poorly cooked stew, unsure if the meat within it is even fresh, or if the vegetables have been contaminated by the muck in the streets. There are no refrigerators to save you from spoilage, and you don't have the luxury of knowing what bacteria might be lurking in your next bite. Water is just as dangerous. You're used to clean water from your taps, but in medieval times, even something as basic as a drink of water is a gamble. Rivers, ponds, and wells are often the sources of your water, but they are also shared by animals. That means your drinking water is just as likely to contain bacteria, parasites, and waste as it is to provide hydration. Sure, you can boil water, but with limited fuel and no real understanding of sanitation, boiling isn't always an option. Even then, you might still find yourself sick. And if you happen to find a piece of meat or fish, it's often salted or smoked to preserve it. While this does keep it from spoiling, it also means your food is now loaded with salt and preservatives. The modern health problems associated with too much salt and fat were of course completely unknown in the medieval era, and so your body is left to deal with the consequences. But there's another problem that makes food even worse. Spoiled or contaminated food can lead to diseases like dysentery, food poisoning and other infections. In the medieval world, if you ate something that made you sick, you'd have no choice but to suffer through it. There are no modern remedies to make you feel better. You'd be left to ride it out in the same unhygienic conditions that made you sick in the first place. Even a simple stomach bug could wipe you out in a matter of days. Now imagine you've somehow survived the grueling days of back-breaking work, hunger, and sickness, only to find yourself at the mercy of the medieval wardrobe. Your clothes are your only shield from the elements, but what exactly are they protecting you from? For the common folk, it's nothing more than a few layers of coarse wool or linen, stitched together with little care for comfort. You thought you were prepared, but after a full day of trudging through mud and dealing with the biting cold, you realize just how unprepared you really are. Medieval clothing by modern standards was utterly uncomfortable. You'd be draped in rough, itchy fabrics, wool and linen, constantly rubbing against your skin, causing irritation. A wool tunic or a linen shift may be all that stands between you and the world outside, but it doesn't offer much relief. The material is stiff, heavy and absorbs sweat, leaving you damp and chilled by nightfall. There's no easy way to dry out your clothes either. On a rainy day, you'd be stuck with soggy layers that offer little protection against the elements. What you wouldn't give for the comfort of modern clothing. Instead, your body is encased in heavy layers that make even the simplest tasks exhausting. Even in the summer, the clothing is thick, designed for warmth, but that warmth becomes a curse in the heat. The medieval world has no concept of breathable fabrics or moisture-wicking technology. You're forced to endure the discomfort, day in and day out. Historians still argue whether the discomfort of medieval clothing was worse in the winter or summer, but one thing is certain: both seasons are miserable. In winter you're frozen in your clothes, and in summer you're drenched in sweat. There's no reprieve. There are no coats lined with warm, soft insulation. No clothes designed to regulate body temperature. The clothes you wear are made to last, but at the cost of your comfort. And let's not forget about the smell. Wool absorbs odors, sweat, dirt, and the dampness of medieval life soak into the fabric, and there's no escaping it. Unlike today, where washing clothes is a simple task, medieval people have to make do with infrequent washes, relying on vinegar or herbal infusions to try and rid their garments of foul odors. But in reality, those odors never really leave. You'd be trapped in a world where no matter how hard you try, you're always left with the sense that you're living in filth. Perhaps the most disheartening part of all this is that your clothing has little chance of improving. You can't just pop into a store and pick up something new. There's no fast fashion, no modern tailoring. The best you can hope for is the hand-me-downs from someone slightly more fortunate than you, or if you're lucky you might be able to trade for something more fitting. But in the medieval world, clothing is a constant reminder of your status. The wealthier you are, the more comfortable your attire. But even then, their soft fabrics are nothing compared to the comforts of modern clothing. You could be a noble, but even your clothes would be harsh by today's standards. As you make your way through the grim reality of medieval life, you can't escape the ever-present shadow of disease. At any moment, something as simple as a cough could be your ticket to an early grave. The constant fear of illness is more than just an annoying thought, it's a looming, terrifying reality. The Black Death, the most infamous of all medieval pandemics, is a part of the everyday conversation. The plague isn't just something that happens to other people, it's something that can strike at any time. And when it does, there's no running from it. The Black Death swept through Europe in waves, devastating entire communities. But the most frightening part, you wouldn't even know when it was coming for you. No one understood how diseases spread in medieval times, and with no knowledge of bacteria, viruses or hygiene, people were left completely vulnerable. All it took was a single infected flea or a cough from someone else, and suddenly, you're part of the statistics. Historians still argue whether the Black Death was a single event or a series of recurring outbreaks, but the impact remains clear. At its peak, it wiped out as much as 1/3 of Europe's population in a matter of months. That's an astonishing loss. Imagine your community, your village, disappearing in a heartbeat. You could go to bed healthy one night, only to be dead by morning. With no medical understanding of the causes or ways to protect yourself, the medieval world was a ticking time bomb. But it wasn't just the Black Death that made medieval life so dangerous. Other diseases like smallpox, cholera, and dysentery were commonplace, especially in the crowded and unsanitary living conditions. Even something as simple as a cut could become infected and lead to death. Without antibiotics, the medical community had no real answers. You could go to a healer or barber surgeon for treatment, but their methods were often worse than the illness itself. Bloodletting, for instance, was a common practice used to balance the humors, but it rarely did anything but weaken the patient further. The concept of hygiene was practically non-existent in the medieval era. Bathing was seen as a luxury, something reserved for the wealthy, and even then, the bathhouses were little more than communal cesspools of filth. People didn't understand the need to wash their hands or to sterilize wounds, so infections spread like wildfire. In fact, many medieval people believed that bathing too often could actually make you sick, as they thought it would open your pores to harmful miasmas, or bad air. This meant that the average person was walking around in their own filth, sharing their diseases with those around them. Imagine being in a place where your best chance of survival is dodging not just the cold and hunger, but the invisible killer that could strike at any moment. It would be a constant state of anxiety. Every cough, every sneeze, every scratch could be the sign of something far worse. You wouldn't just be trying to survive the day, you'd be living in constant fear that death is always just around the corner. As you try to navigate this world of disease and death, you begin to realize that even the place you call home is no sanctuary. Castles, the grand stone fortresses that you've heard so much about, might seem like a refuge, but the reality is far from what you expect. Castles were not the pristine, majestic monuments you imagine. Instead, they were dark, dank, and cramped, far from the luxurious homes of today. Castles, particularly in the early medieval period, weren't built with comfort in mind. These imposing structures were designed for defense, not comfort. You're now realizing just how cold and uncomfortable life would be inside these stone walls. The lack of central heating means that the temperatures inside are nearly as bad as outside. You could be sitting by the fire in the Great Hall, but the cold would creep in from every crack and corner. There's no escaping the chill that seems to seep through your very bones. Your room, it's just as bad if not worse. You're stuck in a small drafty space, likely sharing it with several others. If you're lucky, there might be a straw mattress to lie on, but even that offers little protection from the cold hard stone beneath you. Even if you're a member of the nobility, the discomfort persists. Castles, despite their grandeur, were often dirty places. The lack of sanitation means that the air is thick with the smell of animal waste, human filth, and the ever-present odor of rotting food. While the wealthy might have more space and slightly better living conditions, they too are stuck in a world where cleanliness is a luxury few can afford. Historians still argue whether castles were a true haven for the wealthy, or simply an unavoidable necessity of survival. Either way, these imposing structures offer no comfort. At best, the noble classes could afford the occasional bath, but with limited access to clean water and no understanding of sanitation, the air inside would still be thick with stench. Those in the lower classes, of course, are stuck in even worse conditions. The village houses, small and often built with a thatched roof, offer little protection from the elements. Walls are made from wood or mud, and the floors are little more than packed dirt. There's no insulation, and certainly no concept of privacy. You sleep where you can, and chances are, your bed is shared with several others.
Now imagine that you're living in this cramped, uncomfortable space, with no escape from the constant stench, the cold and the filth. And to make things worse, you have no hope of improving your situation. There's no chance of upgrading to a better home, no chance of getting away from the constant discomfort. The medieval world is a place of relentless endurance, and no matter where you go, the same harsh reality follows you. You can't even rely on the idea of getting away from it all. There's nowhere to go that offers any real relief. The roads outside are dangerous, filled with thieves, bandits, and the threat of violence. Travel is slow, perilous and expensive, so staying put is your only option. But even in the relative safety of your home, you're still constantly at the mercy of the harsh conditions. As you try to adjust to this unbearable existence, the harsh reality of violence begins to make itself known. The medieval world is a place where violence is a constant threat. You've likely already heard the stories of knights and warriors, but the brutal truth is that violence wasn't reserved for battles on the battlefield, it was a daily occurrence. At any given moment, you could find yourself in a physical altercation, and your survival would depend on your ability to defend yourself. Medieval society was a place where disputes were often settled with swords, fists, and anything else that could be used as a weapon. And this isn't just the occasional skirmish. Violence is baked into the very fabric of life. One wrong move in the wrong place, and you could find yourself on the receiving end of a brutal attack. Laws were harsh, and punishments swift. What might seem like a minor insult could lead to a public beating or worse. Your life would be constantly at risk, especially if you're from the lower classes. Violence wasn't limited to physical altercations, it seeped into the very structure of the law. In a world where justice was often delivered with little regard for fairness, those in power could easily abuse their position. The wealthy could use their resources to crush those beneath them, while the poor had little recourse, and even those in power weren't safe. The threat of rebellion, assassination, or a sudden uprising was a constant concern. Everyone, regardless of their status, had to be vigilant at all times. Historians still debate whether life in medieval times was more violent than today, but one thing is clear: the constant threat of violence would wear you down mentally and physically. The fear of attack, the uncertainty of when the next conflict would erupt, would be enough to make anyone feel on edge. And you wouldn't even have the luxury of feeling safe in your own home. Whether in the castle or the village, no one was truly free from the possibility of violence. You were always just one wrong step away from disaster. And then of course, there's the physical toll that violence takes. Even if you survive an altercation, your body would be left with scars and injuries that never fully heal. Without modern medicine or surgical practices, many wounds would fester and become infected. Even a minor injury could lead to a life-threatening infection. What you'd consider a minor scrape today could easily turn into an amputation or worse, in a world where medical treatment is non-existent. As the day winds on, your mind starts to wear down, not just from the constant physical exhaustion, but from the mental strain of living in a world so brutal and uncertain. Each day is a fight for survival, and the constant threat of violence, sickness and death hangs over your head. In medieval times, there's no escaping the grim reality that your life is fragile, and you could easily be swept away by the brutality of the world around you.
The violence you've been exposed to isn't just physical, it's embedded in the very fabric of justice. In the medieval world, law and order aren't concepts that bring comfort or security. They're more like an unpredictable storm, ready to strike down anyone who crosses the line. And in this world, crossing the line could mean anything from stealing a loaf of bread to insulting someone of higher status. The punishment for such crimes is swift, severe, and often public. Medieval justice is nothing like the legal systems we rely on today. There's no fair trial, no right to a lawyer, and certainly no presumption of innocence. The lord or monarch has the final say, and their decisions are often harsh, brutal, and final. Punishments for even minor offences could include whipping, branding, or worse, public execution. Theft, rebellion, or even slander could result in a quick and painful death, often without any opportunity for defence. The medieval world was a place where the law wasn't just a set of rules, it was a weapon, wielded by those with power to crush those beneath them. What's worse is that the justice system in medieval times is designed to maintain a rigid social order. Your social status determines not just how you live, but how you're treated when it comes to the law. If you're a peasant, the justice system is unforgiving. Your life means little. But if you're a noble or part of the clergy, you might have the privilege of a more lenient punishment, or in some cases, none at all. It's a world where the rich and powerful get away with almost anything, while the poor and powerless are crushed under the weight of harsh laws. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was more cruel than the systems we have today. But what's undeniable is that it was a system that often gave little regard to fairness. It was a system built to keep the poor in their place, the rich in power, and the status quo intact. There's no room for mercy in a world like this. When you break the law, or even when someone believes you have, you are forced to pay a heavy price, and the worst part, you don't get a chance to appeal or explain yourself. It's swift, it's violent, and it's final. Imagine living in constant fear of what might happen if you're accused of something. The unease would eat at you, knowing that your life could be destroyed by a single misstep. And if you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, you might end up facing one of the many gruesome punishments that medieval justice delivers. Hanging, beheading, burning at the stake. These weren't just random acts of violence, they were common punishments for crimes that would seem minor by today's standards. The constant pressure of knowing that you were one mistake away from suffering a violent death would wear you down mentally and emotionally. It wouldn't take long before you realize that your survival in this world depends on walking a fine line, never making a wrong move, and always being at the mercy of a law system that has no room for compassion. The brutality of medieval justice, however, is just one of the numerous harsh realities you'd face in this world. Beyond the fear of punishment and the ever-present threat of disease, there's another struggle that would make you wish you could simply disappear from it all. The overwhelming physical labor that fills every waking moment. There's no 9 to 5 here. There's no weekend or holiday to look forward to. Your life revolves around constant exhausting work. In medieval times, especially for the peasantry, there's no downtime. From the moment the sun rises to the moment it sets, you're working in the fields, tending animals, carrying water, chopping firewood, and preparing food. The work is grueling, back-breaking, and repetitive. Your body is your only tool, and it's pushed to the limit. Farming is a matter of survival, and it's a never-ending cycle of planting, harvesting, and maintaining the land. There's no room for mistakes, and there's certainly no room for rest. If you don't work, you don't eat, and you'll never hear the end of it from your lord or the local authorities. Medieval labor is not only physically taxing, it's mentally draining. Imagine spending your entire life doing the same monotonous tasks day in and day out, without the luxury of respite. The work doesn't just drain your energy, it drains your spirit. There's no opportunity for self-improvement, no chance to pursue something more fulfilling. Your days are filled with nothing but the struggle to survive, and there's no way to escape it. Historians still debate the true extent of the suffering caused by medieval labor, but one thing is certain, there's no luxury of free time, no sense of personal freedom. You are simply a cog in the machine of medieval society, and the work you do is meant to serve a much larger purpose that has little to do with your personal well-being. For those who aren't working the land, there are still plenty of other harsh tasks to contend with. You could be a blacksmith, a carpenter, or a weaver. Each job comes with its own set of physical demands and hardships. In the mines, for example, workers would spend long hours in dark, damp tunnels, digging and hauling coal or ore. The air was thick with dust, and the risk of collapse was always looming. Many miners didn't live to see their 40th birthday, and if they did, they were often crippled by the physical toll of the work. Even the wealthy weren't immune to the hard labor of the medieval world. Though they had access to better food and shelter, they were still bound by the rigid Nobles, for instance, were often busy overseeing their estates, organizing hunts, and engaging in political maneuvering. There was always something to do, and the demands of status weighed heavily on them as well. But it's the peasants who bear the brunt of the labor, spending every moment of their lives working for the benefit of the upper classes. The worst part, if you're lucky enough to own a small plot of land, you still have to work it to feed your family. But that land often isn't truly yours. Much of it belongs to your lord, who demands a significant portion of your crops in return for letting you live and work on it. No matter where you are in the medieval world, no matter your social standing, the work never stops. It's a never-ending grind that consumes your life. The only thing that's guaranteed is the exhaustion that accompanies it. As you battle against the constant grind of medieval life, you might think that the worst is over, but you'd be wrong. While the physical and emotional toll of survival is nearly enough to break anyone, there's one more threat that hangs over your head like a dark cloud: the utter lack of personal comfort. In the modern world, we're used to the small luxuries, comfortable chairs, soft beds, hot showers, but in the medieval era, such comforts are non-existent. Let's start with your bed, or what you'd call your bed. It's nothing like the fluffy mattresses and soft pillows you're accustomed to. Instead, it's a straw mattress on the hard, cold ground. It's uncomfortable, damp, and full of bugs, ticks, fleas and lice would be your constant companions. You might throw a blanket over yourself at night, but even that's likely to be made of rough wool, providing little comfort, and even less warmth. And when you lie down, you won't be able to escape the constant stench of sweat, dirt and animal dung that clings to you. The smell permeates your very being, and no amount of washing or changing clothes will make it go away. As you try to sleep, the noise of the world around you keeps you from finding any real rest. The sound of animals stirring, the occasional shout from your neighbors, and the constant creaking of the building all serve to remind you that there's no peace here. And forget about any kind of privacy. Your living space is cramped, shared with family, servants or even other peasants who have nowhere else to go. There's no quiet sanctuary to retreat to, no personal space to call your own. Every part of your life is on display for others to see. Historians still argue about the exact nature of personal privacy in the medieval world, but one thing is clear: it was a luxury that only the very wealthy could afford. Most people lived in communal spaces, where even the most private moments were shared with others. In some cases, entire families lived in a single room, with no separation between living, sleeping and eating areas. The idea of personal time or personal space simply didn't exist. The medieval world was one of constant interaction, and often constant irritation. And if you happen to live in a village or a town, your living conditions might not be much better. Houses were made of wood or mud, often thatched with straw, and there was little to no insulation. When winter sets in, it's cold; when summer comes, it's hot. And in both cases, there's no escaping the discomfort. No air conditioning, no fans, no heated blankets. You're exposed to the elements all the time, and every night is a reminder that the modern comforts you take for granted are worlds away. The lack of comfort extends to almost every aspect of medieval life. Even something as simple as eating a meal would be a reminder of how hard life is. There's no dining table or comfortable chair to sit in. Instead, meals are often eaten sitting on the floor or on rough benches, huddled together with the family or other members of the community. Even the food itself is often unappetizing and difficult to digest, leaving you with little to look forward to at the end of a long, exhausting day. The lack of personal comfort would be one of the most mentally exhausting aspects of medieval life. You could survive the work, the disease and the violence, but the constant discomfort would break you down over time. You'd find yourself longing for the simplest of modern luxuries: a soft bed, a warm bath, or even just a moment of quiet solitude. But in the medieval world, those things are simply out of reach. As you endure this constant state of discomfort, there's one more thing that would make you question your very will to live: the unrelenting, brutal cold of medieval winters. You might have thought the worst was over, but now you're faced with the harsh reality of freezing temperatures, relentless winds, and absolutely no way of warming up. The medieval world doesn't care about your comfort or your survival, for that matter. When the snow begins to fall, your life becomes a battle against the elements. Forget the central heating, the warm clothes, or the cozy winter evenings you know today. In medieval times, winter is an enemy that you must endure in whatever way you can. Houses, if you're lucky enough to have one, are made of stone or wood, with no insulation to keep the cold out. The drafty walls and gaps in the roof allow the icy wind to whistle through the cracks, chilling you to the bone. You're lucky if you have a small fire to warm yourself, but even then, the heat doesn't go far. You'd be forced to huddle around the fire, surrounded by family or fellow villagers, just to try and stay warm. The beds you sleep in during the winter are just as unkind. Straw mattresses, already uncomfortable and full of pests, become even colder when the temperature drops. You might have a blanket to cover yourself, but it won't provide much warmth. And as for your clothing, it's made of thick wool and linen, designed to keep you covered but not necessarily to keep you warm. Wool might trap some heat, but it's also heavy and rough against your skin. You're left feeling cold and sore, with no way to escape the chill that's slowly creeping into every part of your life. Historians still debate just how bad medieval winters were compared to modern winters, but one thing is clear: living through them would be a test of endurance. Without the luxuries of insulated homes, warm blankets, or even reliable sources of heat, surviving the winter months would feel like a daily battle. And to make matters worse, diseases like pneumonia and frostbite were always lurking. The cold didn't just make you uncomfortable, it killed. When the snow falls and the winds pick up, you're left with few choices. You can try to stay inside, huddling as close to the fire as possible, but there's only so much space. If you're one of the poor peasants, your family might be forced to share a single room, with barely enough room for everyone to sleep. The warmth from the fire barely reaches the corners, leaving you cold and exposed. You'd find yourself longing for the warmth of modern life, heating blankets, warm food, but none of that is possible in this time. The worst part, the cold doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it can kill you. Without proper shelter, clothing, or warmth, medieval people died regularly from exposure to the elements. The elderly, the sick and the very young were especially vulnerable to the cold, and entire families could be wiped out by a particularly brutal winter. Even if you manage to survive the cold, your body is still being slowly worn down by the unrelenting chill. No matter how hard you try to escape it, the cold is always there, biting at your skin, numbing your fingers and toes. Imagine waking up each morning to find frost covering the inside of your home. Every breath you take feels like ice, and even the simplest tasks, cooking, working the land, or caring for animals, become near impossible in the freezing cold. In the medieval world, surviving the winter is a matter of endurance, and it's one that few would survive without becoming hardened by the experience. As you continue through the unforgiving medieval world, you can't escape the overwhelming lack of convenience that defines every aspect of your daily life. There are no modern gadgets to make tasks easier, no technology to simplify your day-to-day routine. Everything you do is manual labor, whether it's drawing water from the well, chopping wood for the fire, or making your own tools. Your life is defined by the physical effort required just to survive. Think about something as simple as lighting a fire. In today's world, we can flick a switch, but in the medieval world, starting a fire is a major undertaking. You'd need flint and steel, or perhaps some tinder and a few matches if you're lucky. But even that isn't guaranteed to work. The fire could go out before you've even managed to get it going, and once the flames are finally alive, you'd have to keep them burning all day to stay warm. Firewood doesn't chop itself, it doesn't magically appear. You have to spend hours gathering it, chopping it, and stacking it, one more exhausting task in a never-ending list of chores. Historians still argue how medieval people managed to survive without the conveniences we take for granted, but it's clear, life was hard. Every task took longer than it should, and there was no room for error. Even simple things that we now do without thinking, like turning on a light or making dinner,
were monumental undertakings in the medieval world. And there's no quick fix. If you wanted a meal, you couldn't just pop something into the microwave. It was a long, slow process of gathering ingredients, preparing them by hand, and cooking them over a fire. There's no instant gratification here. Everything requires patience, and you pay for every moment of delay with more work. Even something like washing clothes is a test of endurance. In the modern world, we toss our clothes into a washing machine, and hours later, they're clean and fresh. In the medieval world, laundry is a grueling, labor-intensive process. You have to gather water, heat it over the fire, scrub your clothes by hand, and then hang them to dry, praying that it doesn't rain. There's no detergent to make the process easier, just harsh, lye-based soap that irritates your skin, and if your clothes don't dry properly, they remain damp, clinging to your body with the cold, adding yet another layer of discomfort to your life. The lack of convenience permeates every corner of medieval existence. You don't have a washing machine, a stove, or a grocery store to pick up food. Every step of your day requires effort and time, leaving you with little room to rest. You live in a constant state of exhaustion, with no relief in sight. If you're lucky enough to get a day off, it's often spent recovering from the previous day's labor, and that doesn't leave much room for personal growth or leisure. The lack of modern conveniences would be one of the most mentally taxing aspects of life in medieval times. Your days are filled with never-ending chores, and there's no escape from the physical toll they take on your body. Everything is harder than it has to be, and there's no easy solution. In the medieval world, survival is a matter of brute force and determination, and there's no room for anything else. Comfort, ease, and relaxation are foreign concepts, and you'd be left wondering if it's even worth it to keep going. As the days stretch on in this grueling existence, you begin to realize just how little control you have over your own fate. In medieval times, your social status is everything, and no matter how hard you work, your place in the hierarchy is largely predetermined. If you were born a peasant, you would die a peasant, and there's little chance of ever changing your circumstances. Mobility between classes is virtually non-existent. The medieval world is built on rigid social structures that offer little to no room for upward mobility. You can work yourself to the bone, but unless you're born into a wealthier family, or somehow manage to climb the ranks through sheer luck or extraordinary circumstances, you'll always be stuck in your place. The class system is brutally unforgiving. The aristocracy and nobility are the ones who enjoy the privileges of wealth, power, and luxury, while the peasants, who form the backbone of society, are left to toil in the fields, their lives dictated by the whims of those above them. Even if you were the hardest working person alive, there's no guarantee that your efforts will ever be recognized or rewarded. Instead, you're expected to labor endlessly, just to keep the rich well-fed and clothed, while your own life remains a constant struggle for survival. Historians still debate whether the medieval class system was harsher than the class systems in other historical periods, but one thing is certain: there was little chance for mobility. In a world where wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of the few, most people simply had to accept their fate. There was no dream of social mobility, no hope of a better life through hard work or education. You were born into your role, and that was your life. Even if you were talented, smart, or capable, you had little chance of breaking free from the chains of your social class. And if you happened to be a woman in this system, your chances of ever escaping your designated role were even slimmer. Women had few rights, no property of their own, and were often treated as little more than property themselves. Whether you were born into a peasant family or a noble one, your life would be dominated by the expectations placed on you because of your gender. The medieval world had little room for female autonomy or independence. Marriage, childbearing, and domestic duties were considered your primary purposes, and any deviation from these roles was looked upon with disdain. You could be the smartest, most capable person in your village, but your worth would still be determined by factors outside of your control: your birth, your gender, your social standing. The world around you offers no opportunity for self-improvement, no chance to rise above your circumstances. You'd be trapped in a cycle that was nearly impossible to break. The lack of personal agency in the medieval world is one of the most soul-crushing aspects of life at that time. You have no control over your future, and no matter how hard you work, or how much you dream of something better, you're at the mercy of the system. This sense of helplessness would wear you down over time, making it hard to find any real motivation to keep pushing forward. You may survive, but that's the best you can hope for, survival, day by day, with no promise of anything better. It's an existence defined by monotony, hardship, and an overwhelming lack of freedom. As you begin to settle into the crushing weight of medieval life, it quickly becomes apparent that your life, no matter how hard you work, or how desperately you fight to survive, will always be overshadowed by one inevitable truth: you are powerless. Even your most basic freedoms are beyond your reach. In the medieval world, personal liberty is a concept far removed from your daily existence. Take the freedom to express yourself, for example. In medieval times, especially in the more tightly controlled regions of Europe, you would have little room to speak your mind. Speech is regulated by the church and the state, and you must follow their rules or face severe consequences. The church, with its powerful influence, dictates not only your spiritual beliefs, but also your daily life. The medieval Inquisition, for example, was notorious for punishing anyone who dared challenge the church's teachings. Heresy was a crime punishable by death, and speaking out against the religious or political powers that be could lead to accusations of witchcraft, sorcery, or blasphemy. Even within your own home, you wouldn't have the luxury of privacy or autonomy. In the village, there would be no personal boundaries. People were constantly under the watchful eye of the community, your every move, your every word, scrutinized by those around you. The church kept an eye on your moral conduct, and your neighbors kept track of your actions, ensuring that you remained in line with the expectations of the time. Historians still debate whether medieval people had any true concept of individualism, but what is clear is that the medieval world placed far greater value on collective identity than on personal freedom. Whether you were a peasant or a noble, your life was governed by a rigid system of laws, customs, and social expectations that left little room for individual expression or choice. Even the idea of being able to think for yourself is a luxury. The medieval education system, such as it was, existed to preserve the status quo, not to encourage personal growth or intellectual exploration. The church controlled much of what was taught, and schools, where they existed, were designed to keep you docile, obedient, and unquestioning. Books were expensive and rare, and access to information was strictly limited. If you were lucky enough to learn to read, your options were narrow: scriptures, religious texts, and the works of theologians. Ideas of freedom of thought were far removed from your reality. Your worldview is confined to the teachings of the church, the beliefs of your family, and the customs of your village. And yet, despite all this control, your own desires, ambitions, and individuality still stir inside you. Perhaps deep down, you long for the freedom to explore the world outside your village, to experience something beyond the monotonous cycle of labor and survival. But in the medieval world, that's not a possibility. Travel is difficult, dangerous, and expensive. With few roads, and even fewer maps, venturing beyond your local area is fraught with peril. Bandits roam the roads, the terrain is harsh, and the further you go, the less likely you are to find food, shelter, or safety. The idea of going on a grand adventure is nothing but a fantasy. You are trapped, bound to your land and your social position. Freedom in the medieval world is something that is hard to imagine. It's a distant dream that's beyond your grasp. The reality is that no matter what you achieve, no matter how hard you work, you'll always be tethered to your station in life. Your movements, your thoughts, your very existence are shaped and confined by the rigid structures that govern every aspect of your existence.
As the days drag on in the medieval world, you find that the idea of comfort and peace has become a distant dream. Survival is your only focus, and every step forward feels like a small victory. But just when you think you might have a handle on things, a new terror arrives in the form of yet another societal obstacle, the constant fear of war and conflict. In the medieval world, warfare is not a rare occurrence, it's an ongoing part of life. Even if you manage to avoid the immediate threats of disease, hunger, or brutal living conditions, the looming presence of war can strip you of everything. Warfare in medieval times is brutal and chaotic. There's no clean battlefield with neatly organized armies, no strategic plans executed with precision. War in this world is chaotic and often unpredictable. You could be a peasant, minding your own business, working the fields, and in an instant, everything could change. Invading armies or local lords at war might suddenly sweep through your village, leaving destruction in their wake. Castles and villages are burned to the ground, men are conscripted to fight in the army, often without any say in the matter. And even if you're not drafted into the conflict, you are still a victim of its aftermath. The constant presence of war disrupts trade, depletes resources, and leaves communities in a constant state of instability. You may be struggling to survive on a day-to-day basis, but war takes everything you have. The food you've carefully grown, stolen or destroyed by invaders, the tools you rely on to work the land, taken by soldiers who need them for their own efforts. The security of your home, non-existent. Historians still argue whether the constant state of warfare was more damaging to the medieval population than disease, but it's clear that war plays a significant role in shaping the medieval experience. Entire regions would be ravaged, families torn apart and lives lost, often for causes that were beyond the control of the common people. The nobles and monarchs who waged these wars often do so for power, land, or political influence, but for the peasants, it's simply a matter of survival. War doesn't just affect the soldiers, it destroys communities, robs people of their homes, and leaves entire populations living in fear. The threat of war looms so large in medieval society that it alters every aspect of life. You can't make long-term plans because there's always the possibility that an enemy army will sweep through your area. Even the land you live on is at risk. If a warlord decides to claim it, there's little you can do to stop them. Your life is in constant flux, dictated not by your actions but by forces outside of your control. You can spend years working the same plot of land, only for it to be taken from you in an instant by someone with more power. Imagine waking up one morning, only to hear the distant sound of marching feet and the clanging of armor. The fear would settle in quickly. You've heard stories of villages being destroyed in the middle of the night, of families being slaughtered or taken as prisoners of war. You can't escape the fact that war is a part of life, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Your village could be next. In this world there are no guarantees of peace. In fact, peace is a rarity. You learn to live with the constant tension that war could erupt at any moment, and this mental strain is just as exhausting as the physical labor you endure daily. You find that your life is defined by the unpredictability of war, the constant anxiety of never knowing when your home might be destroyed, when your family might be torn apart. It's not just a fear, it's a way of life, one that you cannot escape. As you continue to navigate the endless battles of survival, you realize that the mental and emotional toll of medieval life is just as debilitating as the physical struggles. The medieval world is defined by a constant state of uncertainty and fear, where nothing, absolutely nothing, is guaranteed. Whether it's the threat of disease, the harshness of the seasons, or the ever-looming shadow of war, your existence is a fragile one. And the emotional strain, while often invisible, weighs on you just as heavily as any physical burden. There's no escaping the ever-present anxiety that comes with simply living in such a volatile time. You never know when disaster will strike, or when your world will come crashing down. Will a plague hit your village tomorrow? Will the Lord's soldiers arrive to take what little you have? Will your family survive the winter, or will hunger and cold take their toll? Every decision you make, no matter how small, is clouded by the ever-present fear that any action could be your last. Even moments that would normally bring comfort, like a family gathering around the fire, are tinged with an underlying sense of dread, as you can never be sure what tomorrow will bring. Historians still debate whether mental health was even a consideration during the medieval era, but it's clear that the emotional toll of living through such hardship would have been immense. With little understanding of mental health, there's no respite from the constant stress. There are no counselors, no support systems, no means of coping with the psychological strain that comes from living in such a brutal world. If you were overwhelmed by the relentless challenges of survival, there was nowhere to turn for help. For many, this constant stress manifests itself in depression, anxiety, and a sense of hopelessness. You begin to wonder whether there's any point in trying to endure it all, or if the only way out is simply to wait for the inevitable. There's no concept of therapy, no way of processing the trauma of seeing loved ones fall ill, of watching your home burn to the ground, or of feeling the constant weight of hunger. For many medieval people, the emotional and mental toll of life would be a silent killer, slowly eroding the spirit over time. Even if you manage to survive physically, there's no guarantee that your emotional resilience will hold up. The constant barrage of challenges can break anyone's will to live, and you begin to see the toll it takes on others around you. People age prematurely, not because of their years, but because of the mental and emotional weight they carry. The fear, the uncertainty, the loss, it all takes its toll. You can see it in their eyes, in the way they walk, in the quiet desperation that follows them through every day. The emotional devastation of medieval life isn't something that's often discussed in historical accounts, but it's as real as any physical hardship. And as you trudge through this world of constant stress and uncertainty, you begin to realize just how fragile the human spirit is. In a world where survival is a daily battle, the toll on your mind is just as intense as the toll on your body. It's a reminder that for all the battles you face on the outside, the true war is often fought within. As you continue to endure the mental and emotional toll of life in medieval times, one harsh reality becomes abundantly clear: there's no escape from the suffocating grip of the Church. The Church holds immense power over every aspect of life. It's not just a religious institution, it's the ruling force that dictates morality, law, and even personal identity. In a world where your every action is scrutinized, it's impossible to ignore the suffocating presence of the Church. From the moment you're born, your life belongs to the Church. You're baptized in its name, married in its sanctity, and ultimately buried under its watchful eyes. The clergy are the only ones who hold knowledge and power, and you, a mere peasant, are left to abide by their rules and doctrines. Your spiritual salvation is in their hands, and any deviance from their teachings is a sin, one that could send you to hell, according to their strict dogma. You've heard whispers of excommunications, of people being cast out of the Church for perceived moral failings or heresy. And if that happens to you, you're not just ostracized from society, you're condemned for eternity. The Church's control over you doesn't stop at your spiritual life. In fact, it extends into every aspect of your existence. The Church sets the laws that govern your daily life. It tells you when to work, when to rest, when to pray, and even what to eat. Fasting during certain seasons is a requirement, otherwise you risk angering God and facing His wrath. It's not about personal choice, it's about submitting to the will of God, as interpreted by the clergy. Historians still debate whether the Church was an inherently oppressive force or a stabilizing influence in medieval society, but one thing is undeniable: the Church shaped every aspect of medieval life, and there was no room for questioning its authority. If you dared to question the teachings of the Church, if you expressed any doubts about its authority, you could find yourself labeled as a heretic. Heretics were seen as enemies of the faith, and were often subjected to terrifying punishments, torture, imprisonment, or worse, execution by burning at the stake. Even the slightest hint of disobedience could cost you your soul and your life. There's no freedom of thought in this world. Even your conscience isn't yours to own. The priests who serve as the voice of the church are the final authority on moral and spiritual matters, and their word is law. You would live your life under constant fear of sinning, of committing an error so great that you'd be doomed forever. In this environment, the idea of individuality or personal belief is practically non-existent. Your beliefs are the church's beliefs, and there's no space for personal exploration. You must submit, or you risk eternal damnation. The church's hold on your life is suffocating. It's not just a place of worship, but a place of control. It dictates how you live, how you think, and ultimately, how you die. The idea of living without such overwhelming control, without constant surveillance of your actions, is an unimaginable luxury. In medieval times, no one had the freedom to make their own choices. And if you dared to defy the church, you could lose everything: your status, your family, your community, and even your life. The power the church held over you was absolute. You were taught to fear not just God, but the wrath of the clergy, who had the power to impose their interpretation of God's will upon you. In this world, questioning the status quo is dangerous. Submitting to the church's authority is the only way to avoid punishment, and even then, there's no guarantee that you'll be spared. Living under the constant surveillance and control of the church, you might think that, at the very least, there's some relief to be found in the natural world. Perhaps a quiet moment spent in the countryside, away from the strictures of society, could offer some respite. But the medieval world has little in the way of solace. In fact, the very land you live on, the earth that should provide you with food and shelter, is often a place of hardship and suffering. The medieval landscape is harsh. There are no lush gardens filled with vibrant flowers, no parks where you can take a leisurely stroll. The land you work is unforgiving, whether you're farming in the fields, hunting in the woods, or fishing in the streams. Nature isn't your companion, it's your constant adversary. Even the seasons are ruthless. The summer heat beats down relentlessly, while the winter cold seeps into your bones. And there's always the threat of crop failure, famine and scarcity. Your survival depends on the land, but the land doesn't give easily. The soil can be poor, and even if it's fertile, it's back-breaking work to maintain. Plowing the land, sowing seeds, tending to crops, every action is exhausting. You're constantly battling the elements, the pests, and the forces of nature. There are no modern farming tools to make the work easier. You do everything by hand, with primitive tools that often break or wear out quickly. Even when you succeed in growing a bountiful crop, there's always the risk of disease or drought ruining your hard work. And then there's the danger that lies in the forests and wildlands beyond your village. While many medieval people depended on hunting for food, venturing into the wilderness is never without risk. Bandits, wild animals, and even neighboring villages could pose a threat. You might wander into an area where you're unfamiliar with the terrain, or where danger lurks just out of sight. The woods are no sanctuary, they are just another battleground in the fight for survival. Even water, a basic necessity, becomes another challenge in the medieval world. Streams and rivers are often contaminated, shared by animals, humans, and waste. You'd be forced to drink water from sources that could be teeming with bacteria and parasites, leading to sickness and disease. The land that should sustain you instead becomes a source of peril. Your connection to nature is no longer peaceful and harmonious. It's one of survival against forces that don't care whether you live or die. In this world, there's no escape from the brutality of nature. Whether it's the land that is unwilling to yield, the seasons that freeze and scorch you, or the animals that threaten your life. Nature is not your friend, it's a constant reminder that your survival is not guaranteed, no matter how hard you work.
You cannot control the land, and you certainly can't control the weather. Even if you manage to make it through the day, there's no telling what tomorrow will bring. A sudden storm could ruin your crops, a cold snap could kill your livestock, or a wildfire could reduce your hard work to ash. And the worst part, you can never fully escape the fear that nature could strike at any moment. It doesn't matter how hard you work or how much you plan. Nature is unpredictable, unforgiving, and indifferent to your survival. In the medieval world, you're just one disaster away from losing everything you've worked for, and there's nothing you can do about it. As the days wear on, and you struggle to survive in a world so relentlessly unforgiving, you begin to realize something truly unsettling. Time itself seems to move at a different pace in the medieval world. The rhythms of life are defined by the seasons, the weather, and the demands of survival. There's no room for reflection, no room for leisure, and no space for any kind of personal ambition. Your entire existence is consumed by the bare necessities: food, shelter, survival. While the modern world rushes forward with the conveniences of technology and the fast pace of daily life, time in the medieval era drags on slowly, grinding away at your spirit. The days feel long, and every task feels like an eternity. From the moment you wake until the moment you collapse into a cold, uncomfortable bed, you're caught in an endless cycle of labor and fear. Your survival is determined by the whims of nature, the greed of those in power, and the randomness of fate. It's a life of constant struggle, where every moment is a reminder that the world around you is merciless and indifferent. In the modern world, we often take time for granted. We fill our days with distractions, conveniences, and technologies designed to make life easier and faster. But in the medieval world, there are no such luxuries. There's no TV to pass the time, no internet to connect you to the outside world. Time stretches out endlessly, filled with nothing but labor, suffering, and the uncertainty of what the future holds. There's no way to escape the harsh reality of your existence. The concept of leisure is foreign to you. You live in a constant state of exhaustion, and the idea of taking a break, of sitting down for a moment of peace, seems like a distant dream. In this world, death is not just an abstract concept, it's an ever-present shadow, lurking in the background, waiting to strike. It's always there, a constant reminder that no matter how hard you fight to survive, your life could be taken at any moment. Whether it's the Black Death, a deadly battle, or simply the harshness of the elements, death is a constant companion. And yet, despite this, life goes on, with no end in sight. You continue to struggle, to work, to fight, because there's nothing else you can do. But even in this relentless cycle of survival, there's a strange kind of resilience that develops. You become accustomed to the struggle, to the constant fight for survival. You learn to accept the hardships, to live with the uncertainty. The brutality of the medieval world might wear you down physically, mentally, and emotionally, but it also makes you stronger, in a way. You learn to endure, to push through the pain, and to keep going, even when it feels like there's no point. The truth is, in the medieval world you don't have the luxury of choice. You don't have the luxury of deciding what kind of life you want to live. You simply survive, day by day, until fate decides your time is up. Your life is dictated by forces beyond your control, whether it's the land, the weather, the disease, or the whims of those in power. You have no say in the matter. But through it all, there's one thing that remains constant: the will to survive. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how much you suffer, you keep going. Because in the medieval world, that's the only thing you can do. And maybe, just maybe, if you survive long enough, the world around you will change. But for now, you live, you endure, and you fight.